Hello, everyone. Welcome to Script and Style. I'm Todd Gardner from Track.js JavaScript Error Monitoring, and my co-host David Walsh, creator of the popular blog davidwalsh.name. How's it going today, David?
Dude, I'm playing injured again. I'm
Injured.
potting injured again.
You know, programming is dangerous work. How did you get injured this time?
So I'm 36 years old and I had 3 soccer games on Sunday. 3. I'm not going to talk about how I scored 7 goals between the 3 and we won all 3.
Humble brag. Humble
But what
brag.
I will say is that I was playing with an injury, not from playing sports, but from sitting at my desk. Like, I think my posture is so bad that, like, my neck, I can barely move my neck right now. And sometimes I can barely move my back. But again, it's not from playing sports. It's just because I'm not sitting properly.
With
Um,
that fancy chair too? You
with
just don't.
with my fancy gaming chair, I used to get a lot of headaches on computers, right? Because you're staring at a screen probably more hours than you should, which
Yep.
maybe we'll talk
Yep.
about a little bit today. But outside of headaches, do you get any computer related injuries that you need to pod through?
Not that's like super bad. Like occasionally, like I'll get like problems with my wrist and my hand if I've been doing too much mouse based work, or like my back will be sore or whatever. But like having the right chair, doing a sit stand desk, those sort of things have been like really helpful for me.
I have a standing desk. You know what? After the pod, I'm gonna stand. I'm gonna stand today, and I'll
You
report
totally
back
should.
next week.
Hold on, we're gonna. We're standing right now. Oh, but my camera's all fucked up now. All right, I'm gonna go back.
It's
Oh,
gonna see. Well, I've got a fancy little remote that does it for me. But standing's a good idea. That's a good tip for what we're talking about today.
speaking of, what are we talking about today?
Well, we talked about getting your first job in the industry 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I thought it would be good to talk about, now that you've got that job, what from our experience are good things to do, bad things to do, and things to be aware of. And it partially comes up because Eric gave me a little bit of grief on our episode a few weeks ago, about me saying, I was in there hour after hour after hour when we were trying to talk about work-life balance, and he said, "Would you do it any other way?" And that made me think we need to talk about this as a main topic.
That sounds great. But first, there's some news we should talk about, right?
Yeah, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I just think it's hilarious. So Yahoo bought Tumblr in 2013 for 1.1 billion American dollars. I
Yep.
don't know how many Bitcoin that was back then, but American dollars.
That's a
Um,
lot of dollars.
that's many dollars. Yahoo liked to throw their money around 4 or 5 years ago.
But in 2013, Tumblr was actually kind of a big deal.
Tumblr was lit. I didn't have one, but there were a lot of Tumblr always felt to me like a good one-page site that you could work on and put somewhere. Like, what was your impression of Tumblr? Did you have one? Did you
I did not have
frequent
a
them?
I did not have a Tumblr site, but my impression of Tumblr was it was not exactly the professional side of the internet. It was more like this is where niche topics go. This is where like people do like anime stuff. This is where cosplay players go. This is where like porn stars do their thing. This is where like all kinds of things that maybe aren't quite as normalized for a professional blog, or probably couldn't get away with like being on WordPress.com or something like that. They would go on Tumblr, and Tumblr was this like place that like was what the internet used to be. Just like crazy stuff, and people sharing their own art, and people sharing their own like kinks about what they're into, and it was kind of fun. It's kind of interesting. You never knew what you'd find if you landed on a Tumblr site.
It sounds like an evolution of something like GeoCities, which Yahoo also bought and burned into the ground. But I find this funny because Automattic, which is the parent company to WordPress, just bought Tumblr for $3 million.
Basically nothing.
$3 million. Like, what kind
They
of
just
investment
they
is putting 1.1 billion into something and selling off for three?
That's the Yahoo way.
Oh, that's terrible, bro.
I mean, Tumblr.com, just the domain is probably worth $3 million.
Right. So there's probably some operating costs and stuff that Automattic is willing to take on, right? They have roughly 200
In fact,
staffers.
the domain was probably worth $5 million, and they had to discount it because it came with a bunch of other Tumblr assets that weren't worth anything anymore.
And of course, we should mention that it's not Yahoo selling it now; it's Verizon who bought out Yahoo. I just had to mention it because I was so taken aback by it. I mean, once Yahoo bought Tumblr, the most I ever heard from Tumblr from that point forward was about their porn ban, which
which really killed Tumblr. Like from that point forward, it was kind of a dead site.
right.
Like because it was all of the sites that fit into that ban that made Tumblr unique.
Exactly, which makes me question, like, what did Yahoo think they were buying?
Yeah. It's like this isn't just like a competitive blogging platform. Like the world has moved past what Tumblr could do. Really, the only thing Tumblr had was its community. And when the ban came in place, it just killed the community. And so now you have like an outdated substandard blogging platform.
Wow. Well, rest in peace, Tumblr. Actually, do you think Automattic could do something with Tumblr?
I bet it could revive it, but I don't know.
Like just another hosted WordPress?
Yeah, I mean, at 3 million, they don't really have to get much out of it.
It's
It's
just
not. It's not. It's not like it's ever going to be a $1.1 billion company again.
no, but I suppose you could put a lot of advertising on that many Tumblr pages. I
Yeah.
mean, there's still a lot of them. But anyways, rest in peace, Tumblr. I had to bring it up.
All right, on to the main event of today. We're going to be giving some advice to people new to the software industry. Some like lessons learned, some things that like we wish we had known ourselves when we were first starting. Just kind of like our quick tips and tricks if you're starting to break into things right now, right?
Yes, sir.
All right, so let's start at the beginning. Let's start like with a quick maybe recap of what we did a few episodes ago with like getting your first job, like interviewing. What do you expect going into that interview?
So for everyone, it's going to be different, right? About what they expect from the interview and even the job, because it sort of depends on where you are in life. I think was a theme that came out of that, and what your past experience was. If you're getting ready for an interview, say, and you're fresh out of school, someone like me would be hungry and desperate, but in a good way, to do well at the interview, study before the interview, study before to see what the company does, um, trying to figure out what technology they use, see if they have an open source community that you can join and maybe contribute something to. Showing up, not looking like a scrub is a good idea. But those are my sort of immediate ideas for what to expect in that first interview. Um, I haven't had that first interview in probably 15 years. Not the fresh out of the industry interview. Um, and the internet's changed a lot since then. It's much more competitive. People are expected to know a lot more out of school, I would say. But
And there's a lot more like niches. Like
right,
just because you understand like yours JavaScript stack doesn't necessarily mean you're going to fully understand the subset of tools that they use. And so like you can come off kind of looking like you don't know anything, even though you really do, if you just like, I know how everything works in the React Go blah 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 less stack. But oh, they use the Angular Webpack, TypeScript, whatever stack, and if you just don't know it,
and it
because
works.
it's
It works the other way, where you might find that you're too dependent on those tools and not know the basics of the language, so to speak, to be
right.
able to move around.
Yeah, you could be like a really adept like React developer, and then you roll in, and they're like, all right, tell me, let's manipulate this with native JavaScript. Let's loop over this. Let's talk about a prototype. Let's do basic, platform JavaScript things, and you might have never done those sort of things if you're too reliant on the frameworks.
Absolutely. I gave a lot of interviews during the framework boom days, and I'd ask someone how to get child nodes of a given node, and they would recite a jQuery answer.
Yeah.
And
that would put them off because you're a modules guy.
Well, obviously that was the biggest issue. But no,
yeah, if they told you how to do it in modules, it would have been all good, right?
Well, actually, yes, because we use native JavaScript. Anyways, but that is a real concern. So I think that one thing that people should know going into an interview is that they're applying somewhere that they think is on their level. It's always good to be ambitious, right? But if you don't have a lot of experience, trying to interview at Facebook might not be the best place to start. So sort of knowing where you think you can find yourself and being realistic with yourself is really important.
Now, I heard a great piece of advice recently on going into that first interview, and a lot of people are all worried, but am I going to be tested? Are they going to give me like a coding test? Am I going to have to like whiteboard something out in front of other developers? And one way to kind of like sidestep that is to just be kind of aggressive about it. I heard this advice from my friend Jennifer Wadella last week, and she's like, find out what basic technologies this company uses, and build something yourself. Like build like a fun little like website and throw it out on your open source GitHub using their stuff. And then the first question, like right off the bat in the interview, find a way to talk about the project you already built. Because then you can speak intelligently, you can talk about it, like try and basically take over the interview process to talk about the site you've already built. And I think that's like a great way to like kind of control the situation, demonstrate your knowledge, and demonstrate like leadership, because you are trying to like get to the point and not letting them bring you around.
I think that is excellent advice, and I can speak to that because for my first interview, to get my first job in the industry, I had brought in a project that I created myself to teach myself PHP. I created my own like IMDb, David Walsh DB. Of all the
David Walsh things that have happened.
No, of all the movies that I owned, right? And I legit used that project to teach myself PHP and MySQL. And so somehow that worked in my favor, because if I looked at it now, the code would probably be terrible. But I can attest to bringing in a project like that, although I did it on a thumb drive. Obviously, GitHub wasn't around. Doing something like that does put you in the driver's seat, doesn't it? Because you have something that you can show them. And in my opinion, I don't know anybody who likes giving the whiteboard interview, because it's awkward and difficult for everybody. There's nobody who doesn't need to look up basic stuff on Google all the time to remind themselves of things. So putting someone on the spot, especially with like a coding practice, to me is just not good for anybody. But a real project is something you can both look at and discuss.
But let's say that you get past all that and you get an offer, or they start asking you like, hey, so what kind of like expectations for compensation you're getting? Do you have any, like, how would you negotiate? Like, would you just take the offer and run, or what kind of advice would you offer?
My advice there again is like a lifestyle thing. The negotiation that I would go through as a just out of college, as I did, is different than what I would now, having a family, right, and expecting certain amount of PTO and insurance and stuff. If I was fresh out of school, I would look for the basics, right? I would look for retirement, insurance, a wage that lets me live comfortably in the short term. And I would also ask up front, how can I, within 6 months, improve my salary? I think that question is really important, because it shows the person who's offering something to you that you're going to work really hard. And even if that motivation is money, they're going to get their money out of you that first 6 months with that type of attitude. How about yourself?
It's very contextual about like what you're going to do. Like, I like the focusing on the basics, like benefits like foosball tables and free lunch and stuff like that aren't actually like really worth that much.
You mean not everybody has their own cafeteria?
Usually it's kind of gimmicky, and like you're not actually going to get out of it what you think you're going to get out of it. Um, as far as like actual dollar negotiation, this might be like less relevant for your very first job, in tech, but for all other jobs, never tell them how much you're making before. It's none of their business. And it sets you at a bar that like, he was only making, X before. We really only have to offer X plus 15%. And that's as high as we need to go, even if they'd be willing to go far higher. So like, don't limit yourself. It's really none of their business. They have no right to know it. And it gives them a card in the negotiations.
It gives them a real big card. It gives them a trump card in the negotiation.
Yeah. So just don't tell interviewers how much you make now. Tell them how much you want, not how much you make now, because you can like it is ridiculous the amount of variability in the pay scales at different tech jobs. Like you can find two tech jobs that are almost identical at two different companies in the same city, and one will pay you 50,000 and the other will pay you 90,000. And there's really nothing different about them other than they are different. Like one company negotiated somebody really low and the other one paid a little bit closer to market rate. So you owe yourself to, hold on to it and negotiate.
And I think there are also sites out there that will give you a baseline number to work from.
Yeah, I think so. Every market's different. Every city's different. It depends on your cost of living and the company and stuff like that. Like, a job in the Valley is going to be very different than a job in like Iowa or a job in Minneapolis or a job in Chicago or whatever. It's going to be very contextual to the market and where you are. But know that there's lots of variability and negotiation is well worth your time. Okay, so let's say you've negotiated and you've got the job.
Yes.
Yes, we got it. Celebrate. And then first day, and you roll in there and you got to figure out how to work and how to adjust and how to be part of this team that you've just joined. What are your thoughts on that?
You're going to want to fit into the culture as quickly as possible. And I think that you need to find a place where you believe in that culture. That way it's easy. If I were to go to a place that was super stuffy, I wouldn't do well. I don't think I'd fit in very well because that's not my general attitude. But there's going to be a little bit of culture shock as well, no matter where you've come from.
Especially if you're just rolling out of school.
But that can be a good thing and a bad thing, right? Because you don't necessarily know better.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say? And I'm not saying that people are naive, but it's like you maybe don't have much more of a frame of reference, right?
Yeah.
Cool. And for me, that culture shock always tends to be sort of baptism by fire, right? Like I thrive under baptism by fire. I jump right into the deep end. How about yourself? Is that
what do you mean by that? What do you mean baptism by fire?
I want to land code the first day. I just want to jump.
Oh.
I just want to jump in, man. I just want to get in there. I want to try and start solving problems right away. I don't want people having to explain apps or bugs or stuff like that to me. I learn a lot better by code. How about yourself? Are you sort of that baptism by fire guy?
Probably not in the same way. Like I'm usually not as optimistic to try and land code the first day. It'd be great, but usually there's just corporate BS that prevents that from happening.
HR.
Yeah. Getting going and hitting it hard when you first start, I do think is important to like getting both yourself and your relationship with this new company off on the right foot by showing that you're like willing to work hard, you're smart, you're dedicated, and you're establishing a reputation with them to know what's going on. And I think that's really important. What that is, I think is again contextually sensitive. If you're coming in as like a staff programmer and like your job is going to be like pulling tickets and stuff like that, that could be about like how can you get to code as fast as possible. If you're going to be like working with a collaborative team, like maybe it's about like pair programming with somebody else or mob programming with a team to try and like understand the overall architecture. But definitely whatever that role is that you're landing into, trying to hit it hard for at least that first, 3 to 5 weeks, I think can do nothing but help. It really establishes a really good reputation.
I've not heard of mob programming before. Like, do you get kneecapped if you make a mistake?
No, like mob programming. The idea behind it is just like pair, except if you add a third or a fourth or a fifth person,
Okay.
now it's a mob, right? And it's not useful like all the time, right? Like I personally think that pair programming isn't useful all the time. I think pair programming is useful when you're like solving something new, like a new kind of path through your code base, and you want to like get multiple perspectives and drive through it. And mob programming is probably even less widely needed, but there's a handful of times, like when you're first establishing an architecture, like you are laying down a greenfield system and you are building the first 1,000 lines of code in a team of 5, let's say. Maybe 5 of you should mob program the first 1,000 lines of code together and just sit around a conference table and like, all right, what are we going to use? Oh, we'll put it in this preprocessor. Oh, all right, here's what the hint index page looks like. Oh, here's like the very high level basic structure. Works well. Like it's a good way to get off on the same page. Same way with like training. If you're coming in as like this more senior person with a group of with a team, it's useful as like a training mechanism to mob program together.
I really like that. When you first started mentioning it, I thought that mob programming might be overwhelming to a new person because there's so many people talking. There's so many ideas for which you don't have the context of.
Yeah.
But it's also really nice that it embeds you with the team. You can feel free to share your ideas, and you're not isolated to try and do things on your own right away.
Yeah.
That's really cool. That's a good idea.
So what other ideas as far as adjusting to the culture? Any other tips?
You made a really good point that within the first 3 to 5 weeks, you should really try and bomb in there, work hard, make things happen. For me, part of that means working late. And I think that even if it's a case where you aren't getting paid overtime, like if you're a salaried position, I think it sets a marker that you're willing to go the distance for the project, for your team. And I think that management really, really notices that, hey, I've got somebody who's in there who right away is willing to work late and make things happen. I think that's really, it sets a really good marker for people. I think that's really important. Of course, you shouldn't work yourself to death right away. And of course, if you have other responsibilities, you have to be there. But how are you at working late at first?
Again, I think it's important at the beginning, not like super late. Like I'm not talking about working like 12-hour days, but like, being there, a little bit early and a little bit late for that first, 3 to 5 weeks, I think is really important. But I don't know if we're on the same page, because I think working late habitually is actually a huge red flag, and I would not work for a company that would insist upon that.
Just in the beginning?
I would say just in the beginning. And then if after those first 3 to 5 weeks, when you feel like you have a reputation at that company, if you feel like you need to work more than what's expected, be that like a 40-hour week or whatever, if you feel like you need to be there more, I would say that's a big red flag, because hours per day, I don't think is actually a good measure of programmer capability, right? Like I usually deliver the majority of the value that I'm going to get out of a programming day within 5 hours.
Sure.
And then after that, sometimes I deliver a little bit more. Sometimes it's neutral, like I don't get anything substantial done. And other times I actually damage the overall thing. Like I'm burnt out and I like am throwing code that, is going to get rolled back, or it's going to get cause bugs or something like that. And so like when you push yourself too hard, I think it can be kind of damaging sometimes, both professionally and personally. And so I don't like having those hours forced on you, like that you feel obligated to be there longer than a normal working day in your culture.
I agree. I agree. That's good. And speaking of damage limitation, if you're new to the industry, you're also going to have to forgive yourself for making mistakes because you
Oh
are
yeah,
going to make a lot of them.
and everybody does. I've gone to places where you start by everybody sharing like their biggest fails of like deleting production databases and taking down airports and whatever. Like it's
They're just
everybody
smoking.
has
They're
done
just smoking out what you shouldn't be responsible for. But no, like you're going to make a lot of mistakes, and if you're someone like me and you like take them hard and take things personally, you have to know that everyone sort of expects you to make mistakes up front, especially just out of school, right?
Yeah.
But that's anybody that walks into your organization. Um,
And on the flip side of making mistakes, you need to be proud and like talk about when you're doing things well. Like when you come in and you cranked out a feature or you've solved a bug or you've like done something like in the status meeting or the daily stand up or whatever your team has, be sure to talk about the stuff that you're doing and celebrate when you're like, hey, I finally like understand how that service works. And they're like, oh, it took me 6 months to figure out how that works. Be sure to talk about it. Like, don't just close up and do your own thing. Like, talk about what you're doing with your team because they don't necessarily know what you're doing all the time if you don't share.
yeah, I agree with that. Being able to acknowledge when you're doing well is really important. I've been places where major accomplishments sometimes get treated as just another day, and that's not for me a good work environment. You need to be able to say, I own today. This project's awesome, and I'm going to keep doing it. So celebrating
Yeah.
is super important.
So let's in our fictional story here. We have the job. We've crushed it for the first 3 to 5 weeks. We have a
Crushed
good
it.
reputation, and now what? Like we're sliding into the routine of the job. Like what is a good routine for you? Like what does your day-to-day look like after you have normalized in this job?
That is a really good question. Um, for me, it was getting to work on time. Not well, you should do that. Getting to work,
You should show up.
right? You should definitely go. You should. I always try to get there at the same time, so people knew that they could count on me to be there at a given time. And I think that's good, especially if you have clients who need things from you. Um, Obviously, dressing professionally isn't something that we should need to say, but that sort of thing is important. It's important not to let yourself get, I don't want to say lazy in the way that you present yourself, but once you've been somewhere for a long time, you can get, I guess, overly comfortable.
Yeah. But it's contextual again, right? Because dressing well, presenting yourself well doesn't mean the same thing. Like it depends on the company you're in and the culture that they are. It's just about like, coming in and trying and looking like you're trying every day. And that could still mean that you're wearing a t-shirt and jeans or that you have like a bunch of cool nose rings and a tattoo. That's all totally cool. Just look like you're trying. Um, and look like you belong there and you want to be there and you're excited to be there.
Yeah, having a good attitude and maintaining a good attitude. And if you feel your attitude sliding, talking to people about it, I think communication is really one of the things that once you get into that routine is going to, I guess, make or break you long term. If you're
Yeah.
somebody who's willing to talk about problems, to I don't like using the word confront, but if you need to confront a manager or someone about how this project's going, about the way you've been treated about something, communication is key. If you let things fester, you're going to get really bitter about your job to the point where you might not be able to pull that back.
Yeah.
So communication in that time is really key. What do you think about that? About that honeymoon period being over and keeping things rolling
Yeah,
along.
yeah. So you need to like get in. I like your comments. You need to come in. You need care, and you should establish like your normal working hours, like coming in at the same time, taking lunch at about the same time, like being gone, like taking off for the day at the same time, spending time like away from your desk and like getting away from your problems. I think is important just for like clearing your headspace, and not like just throwing yourself in like being in the same place all the time. Um, and then knowing when you need to like do other things. Like when do you need to talk to people? When do you need to like engage with an architect or talk to a manager or talk with your peers or talk with ops or security or whomever? Getting into those things about where you know who needs to be informed of what kind of things, I think is a really important skill.
Especially on a distributed team. So I work with
Yeah, yeah,
a lot of Europeans, and so when I leave at the end of the day, I make sure that I send them all of my questions or communications so that they have it for themselves in the morning. And by the time I get in the next day, they have answers for me, and you can keep pushing the project forward.
yeah, yeah. Now sometimes it needs to go beyond an email though. Sometimes you need to like summon a group of people together for a meeting, right?
Sure.
And like how do you like some cultures like have way too many meetings. Like you've gone into some businesses and it's like, oh, I have like 6 hours of meetings a day. Like how do I actually get anything done?
Right.
um, Knowing when to go to a meeting and how to hold a meeting, I think are like really important pieces of productivity for not only yourself, but for the team and the company that you're in. And so, like, I have some specific ideas on how to run a meeting. David, do you stuff like you're all remote? Are there still like formal meetings?
Yeah, I have them all the time. Video meetings. We're on Slack, but that doesn't really count. But one of the nice things that my team does at Mozilla is that we'll jump on a call for 3 minutes to talk something out really quick. Meetings don't have to be super formal. They don't need to pull in a bunch of people. But I think before you start a meeting, you need to have a clear reason and a clear desired outcome.
Yeah, those
Otherwise,
are real.
people are going to get really upset about the amount of meetings.
Yeah, so big meetings or small meetings, I think that's actually a really important thing. It's like have a specific thing, like here's a question I need to answer, and here's what I need to like come away from this meeting with. And I've gone to so many meetings where like that bar has not been met. It's like, oh, we're here to talk about the new fulfillment service and what it should look like. And like that doesn't tell me like what are we deciding? Are we deciding technology? Are we deciding API? Like why are we doing this? And then having that relevant like background material ready so that the people who you pull together can make that decision. And then probably only having the people you need to be there. Like just because you're building something that kind of impacts 12 people doesn't mean you need to include all 12 people. Like have a conversation with like the core decision. Like if you can't make the decision on your own, then you should have that meeting with the people who can make the decision and only those people. Don't bring everybody in and waste everybody's time for every little thing.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who see meetings as a worst case scenario sort of situation. And if that's the case, you need to have the clear idea and the clear outcome, but you also need to be prepared. Otherwise, people are going to feel like you're wasting their time and you won't look very professional.
Yeah, absolutely. So, continuing on in our story, we've had our routine, we've done our thing for a while, it's been a good run. When do you know that it's time to go? When do you know that's like, all right, you've gotten everything out of this job that you need to? It's time to go look for that next thing. It's time to move on.
I think it's when you notice your attitude and your enthusiasm start to slip. I think is what I learned. In that first job that I had, it was really cool for the first 2 years. By the third year, I was sort of getting frustrated with some of the responsibilities that had been put on me, namely like taking calls from clients because I'm a software
Yeah.
engineer and I can't code and talk at the same time. And I would say I did it wrong because the last 2 years I just didn't want to be there. that was my attitude. I would go home. I would only get a half-hour lunch, and I lived 10 minutes away, and I would drive home for lunch. Like it just, I didn't want to be there. So I think that you need to be honest with yourself and say, this isn't what I want, and then communicate that upward. If you feel it start to slip, it might just mean you need to talk to your manager or your employer and say, listen, I'm not really enjoying this. Here's how I think that we can make it better. Because no, if a business doesn't want you, they'll get rid of you, right? And so if a business isn't willing to or hasn't let you go, it probably means they want you there and they want to try and keep you happy because that keeps the ball rolling for everything else. Um, and so I guess that's my best advice. I've done it wrong once and I've done it right once. How about yourself? How did you know it was time to go from your first job?
I spent way too long at my first job. Like I was at my first job for 7 years, and I was not excited about it at the end. I was doing the absolute minimum I could get away with because I just didn't want to be there. And one of the things that that I ran into is I started to feel like I was the smartest guy in the room, like that I knew how the system worked better than anybody else. And I did because I'd been there like the longest. And like there were things that like only Todd could do. Or not that only I could do, but nobody else was willing to learn it. And it just kind of became like my default. And then I would look around the team that I was a part of, and I didn't know that I had a whole lot to learn from anybody around me anymore. Like I felt like I had extracted all of the lessons that I could in my time there. And I think that's a really good sign that you need to move on. When you look around at the people you're working with and the things that you're working on, and you don't know that you have anything substantial to learn there anymore, I think it's time to move on. I think you should go and find somewhere new where you're going to be challenged and there's new people that you can learn from. But knowing yourself, like trying to like put aside either arrogance on one side or imposter syndrome on the other side, and really knowing where you are. Like, do you feel like you're the smartest in the room because you're an arrogant asshole? Or are you really the smartest person in the room? And like look back on the last couple of weeks there. Has there been any like really great interactions that you've had? Has there been things that like you thought were really novel or lessons that you've taken to heart? And if you continually say no, then maybe it's time to move on and go find that next challenge in your life.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. Like you, as I mentioned, I spent too many years there, and I think part of it was imposter syndrome. A big part of it was. The other part of it being, you and I are in the Midwest, and at that time, like web wasn't a huge Midwest business, right? But lastly, I think I always had a romantic notion that you work for some place for like your parents did for 30 years. You get the watch, you get the cigar, and I don't know if that's a Midwest attitude, but I shouldn't say the coding industry, the tech industry isn't like that anymore. You sort of get the impression that a lot of people new to tech would think that you stay at a place for 1 or 2 years, then move on to this other fun startup project, and then this other thing. For me, I didn't feel that way. And I've been at Mozilla 7 years now, right? And I'm super happy and excited to be here. So I do think that your advice about not wanting to be the smartest person in the room is really important. It also shows ambition, right? Like you want to keep learning. You want to learn more. You're not there to camp out and wait for retirement, right? And just collect your check. I think that's really good advice. That's really awesome advice, Todd.
At my first employer, they had a great big plaque in the main hallway of what they called the Quarter Century Club. And it was all of the people at the company who'd been there 25 years or longer. And it was a lot of people. Like the company, like, really like had this whole thing where they said that we want like lifetime employees and stuff like that. And it was really easy to buy into it. It was a good story right up until hard times came. And then there were layoffs. And then it's like, you know what? Companies aren't on your side, regardless of what they say. They are not on your side. This isn't a utopia. This is capitalism. And the company will keep you as long as you are valuable to them. And they don't like you as a company. It doesn't hate you. It's not evil. It's amoral. It is trying to maximize shareholder value. And you should just accept that as a person. Like, stay there as long as you're getting something out of it. And you shouldn't have loyalty to a company. Company loyalty is a thing that companies made up so that they don't have to pay people as much. Just stay somewhere as long as you're getting something out of it. And then when you're not getting something out of it, go somewhere else that you'll get something out of it. Because that's how the system is set up to work. And if you're not doing that, I think you're putting risk at yourself, that you are stagnating, that you are becoming a quarter-century club member at your company, but you don't really have 25 years of experience. You have the same 2 years of experience 12 times.
You just broke some hearts with that. Don't go back to that company. I hope they don't hear this. But no, you're absolutely right. I mean, there are a lot of people that I know who stayed in a job years too long because, well, I like working with this person, or this person's really nice to me. It's like you can hang out after work when you get that new job, right? Like, you need
your
to look out
friends.
for
Go get
yourself.
happy hour once a month afterwards, or stay friends with them. But you can move on.
Absolutely, I agree.
All right. Well, so we've been going for a while. Let's do some last minute advice. So stuff that we didn't cover, like what sort of things that didn't fit into our little story here would you tell to somebody just getting into our industry or just starting their career that they should keep an eye on?
One thing that I'm much smarter about now and wish I was smarter about back then was money. And a lot of the younger people that I've spoken to in the industry, when I ask about, hey, like what benefits do you get? Because asking about benefits is asking a lot more than asking their salary. That's a bit rude. But you can always talk about benefits, right? And they'll be like, hey, I got my retirement set up, which is baller. That's really good. But they don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
What fund they're in, if they're putting in the minimum each week, how much is your employer matching? Money, I promise you, will be a lot more important to you in coming years. So it's really important that you get off to a good start. So knowing where your money is going, I think, is really important.
Tips for that 401k, like what? So setting that up, you mentioned that specifically. What should people do?
I don't want to give financial.
We are not financial advisors.
Right. I don't want to give people financial advice, but I do think that people need to do their own research and figure out how aggressive they want to be, how conservative they want to be with their money, but at least know where you are, which index, or which stocks, whatever. I think that's really important. The other big thing for me, take your PTO. I need to listen to my own advice because I never take my PTO. But don't get yourself worked to death. Don't feel like you can't take vacation. And a lot of places, of course, like if you don't use it, you lose it. So take your vacation, stay mentally and physically fresh, and you'll be a lot happier person. Oh, that coming back around to the being somewhere for 25 years in your watch story, you also hear the stories. My dad didn't miss a day of work in 30 years. Take your PTO, get your head right. You'll be much happier for it.
Yeah.
How about you? What are your sort of quick tips?
Money, I think, is, again, very important. Don't leave money on the table. Like, if there is an employer match with your retirement, make sure that you are capitalizing on all of that employer match. If there are benefits around life insurance and health insurance and disability insurance, you should totally capitalize on those and take those. Over the first 5 years or so of your career, 5-10 years of your career, you're going to see a lot of step ups in your pay, or you should, if you're making the right moves. And then as your pay increases, as you get a 3% bump, a 5% bump, a 10% bump as you move around, it's going to be really tempting to just increase your lifestyle spend, tick for tick, all the way up. And then you never feel like you have more money. You have a nicer car, you have a bigger house, you have more stuff, but you don't feel like you have more money. And that can be really hard, especially if you're paying off student loans, or maybe you have some debt problems that you are trying to get out from under. And so at least some of the times as your pay ticks up, try and hold your lifestyle right where it is, because it's going to let you accumulate some cash to save for retirement, to save for the rainy day, to pay off your student loans, to do that sort of thing. If you can just try and keep your lifestyle right where it was at when you were making X, so that when you're making X plus 10%, now you have just 10% more that you can like throw at your savings, throw at your retirement. On the PTO side, on the personal side, be sure like you're building your personal life up as you're building your professional one. So develop your hobbies, do your hobbies, take your PTO, go on the vacations, see the places you want to see, and don't neglect the other relationships in your life because you're trying to build your professional career. Like, just it's your life. Build your life. Don't build your job. Make sure you understand what part of your life your job should hold for you.
Very cool. And the last really quick tip I'm going to give is ask for help. Don't let yourself get stuck on things and let it affect your attitude, because that's really going to make work hard to go to every day.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So we told the whole story. We gave a lot of advice. What is your core takeaway? What is the one thing you want to leave our listeners with today, David?
One thing that you had mentioned that I hadn't thought of in a long time was that the company isn't your friend. And that's not to say that they're bad, but no one's ever going to look out for you more than you're going to look out for yourself. And no one relies on you looking after them more than yourself. So regardless of whether you like the people at your work, or whether you're willing to put up with something for less pay, you need to advocate for yourself. You need to be your own best friend, and you need to not let your self-worth revolve around what the company thinks you're worth. How about yourself?
I want to reiterate something we told at the beginning around that baptism by fire and like killing it early when you jump into a new job. I think it sets the whole tone for a relationship with a new job. To just spend that first 3 to 5 weeks. You don't have to do it forever, but just give it your all for that short burst at the beginning to learn what you need to learn, establish yourself as an influencer, and really show everybody that you're here to like make good things happen. And then like it gives you so many more options for how that relationship will develop after that time. I think that's a really important note that not a lot of people do.
Awesome.
All right. Well, this was our show. It'll be online. Well, if you're listening to it, it's already been online. So that's kind of a dumb thing for me to say. If you have comments, questions, show ideas, guest ideas, please let us know. Shoot us a link on Twitter. We're at Script and Style. Or me personally, I'm at Todd H. Gardner.
I'm at David Walsh Blog. Adios.
Thanks so much for joining us.